Okay, so let's dig into the specifics. As I said, in general, trade leads to growth, higher standard of living. But the reality is nuanced. Like there's definitely losers um, from trade. I mean, my grandfather lost a ton from trade due to NAFTA and the rise of China. Essentially, his business went belly up. Could have had a trust fund, although looking at my friends who have trust funds, how their lives turned out, it's probably better that did not have that. All right, but enough about my obscure family history. So the case that we are usually concerned about in the U.S. is the case of foreign competition in the form of imports. And here, what is going to happen, as we outlined before, the producers are going to lose and consumers are going to gain through lower prices. And so, as I said, even if you probably add up the gains, they outweigh the losses. Um, it's really too important to understand what exactly is going on. So you're going to have these losses, and they're going to be concentrated and very large. So companies will go out of business, factories will close, workers will lose their jobs. So what we have is the losses are concentrated and large. So what that means is, not like a very small part of the population is going to experience these losses, but they will be very significant. The gains are going to be widespread. Essentially, everybody's going to experience the gains. Your TVs are going to be cheaper. Your clothes are going to be cheaper. But they're very small. They're incremental. Now, if we add up all those gains, since it's the entire population, they would outweigh the losses that are concentrated. And so, what will happen is, since everyone who feels the gains doesn't really notice them, you don't notice that your TV is 20% cheaper. You don't notice that your computer is cheaper, your iPhone is cheaper because of trade. You barely notice it. But the losses are really, really strongly felt, and so they are going to be very vocal, and they're essentially going to be very influential in policy. And also, so you're going to hear about the losses, and they're going to try to capture the political system to get rid of trade. Also, we don't really have very good policies to really help out these losers of trade. So yeah, we have some like trade adjustment policies, and of course we have our typical social safety net policies, but it's not really, it's not necessarily targeted to really help these people who you are going to lose from trade. And also, some of these losses are non-monetary. We're not going to be able to capture them. It's when you lose your job, that you can always say, okay, well, we lost its salary, but it has a scarring effect. It's very traumatic experience. And especially if you think about like what's happening here is many towns, they're losing their economic base. They're factory towns that are losing their factories. So it's like the whole purpose of the towns is being displaced. And so in that cases, and when those losses hit, and if they kind of hit this whole town, you're really going to have these negative externalities, these negative spillovers. So if you think of like a small impact of trade, one factory shuts down. But if we have lots of other factories, okay, the workers go to the other factories, they find other jobs, not a big deal. But if it's the case that you have like one industry towns or towns where all of their industries are wiped out, well, then you're going to have significant negative spillovers because the normal process of creative destruction where people lose their job but find a new one, that's not going to happen. You're going to have long-term unemployment. And when that occurs, you're going to have all sorts of other negative things happening. We'll talk about this later. And so, what happened in the U.S. over the past, say 20 years, is what is referred to in the literature as the China shock. And so, this is really a singular event. Okay, like China is an incredibly large country that developed very rapidly. And so usually what happens when a country develops, it's typically fairly small, and it develops in a few key industries. All right. So like Japan was like that when Japan kind of redeveloped after World War II. And so those industries are hit in terms of the US. Those industries are hit, but their impact's relatively small. And as I said, you have this kind of normal process where that industry declines, but other industries rise up. China is a country that is so large, and it essentially grew in manufacturing in all the industries. And you go to China, it's kind of like you can go to town by town, and they're focused on, manufacturing one particular industry. There's a town that manufactures playground equipment. There's another one that does I don't know, what are those things called? Those like scooters that people ride on. I don't know. Those things that were popular a while ago. Whatever. The point is they essentially went into all the industries, furniture, whatever. And so when we look at that impact, it really just completely undermined the economic base of many, many industrial towns in the US. And so here we have the import penetration and we have our manufacturing employment to population in the US. And so really this growth of China was so large and it really just hollowed out our manufacturing employment. We still manufacture a lot in the US, but it's primarily done, it's automated. Um, and so what the China shock does, this is all from ChinaShock.info, which is these economic economists who really kind of chronicled this and tried to measure this, Otto, Dorn, and Hansen. And so what they've tried to capture is what were the areas of the U.S. that were hardest hit by the rise of China. And so the red parts are harder hit in terms of like these are areas that were really the economic base of those areas are concentrated in industries that were affected by the growth of China. And so you can kind of see it's kind of here through the rural South and then kind of the industrial North that really gets hit hard. And so what these authors show is that there really was a long-term effect. So in economic theory terms, there should not be a long-term effect. Trade hits, you get some losers of trade, they move into another industry, boom, not a big deal, all right, in the grand scheme of things. Of course, it's a big deal in people's lives, but in terms of the overall growth of the country, not a huge effect. What these authors show, Otter, Dorn, and Hansen, is really there was long-term effects of the rise of China. Now, also, it should be noted, the rise of China was incredibly beneficial for the Chinese population. Essentially, it was the largest, movement out of poverty in human history. So, hundreds of millions of people went from a rural lifestyle that was incredibly hard and incredibly poor to an urban lifestyle that, to our Western eyes and developed eyes, looks terrible. But relative to where they came from, it was it was an increase in living standards. But in the U.S., we have these long-term effects. So we have these labor force participation rates, which are lower. Unemployment rates are higher in these areas way after the rise of China. We have increased disability payments, unemployment, Social Security payments to these areas, essentially to combat this displacement. We have lower marriage rates, higher single motherhood rates in these areas, and political polarization. That these areas are more likely to elect conservative Republican or liberal Democrat over a moderate candidate. So this China shock really has this polarizing effect, and the severe negative economic consequences 10 years out. If you look back at this map, you overlay kind of Trump's victory share, it would almost be 1-to-1, close to 1-to-1 in many of these places in terms of that political polarization. Okay, we're going to connect this up to another unfortunate phenomena that has developed in the US, which is deaths from despair. So we'll do that in the next video.